This spring, Cuba's Civil Defense Agency circulated a family guide with a chilling instruction: prepare a backpack of non-perishable food and supplies, in case of what it called a hypothetical military aggression against the island. For a government known for hurricane drills, this was something new. This time, the storm they are preparing for is not weather. State television has aired footage of civilians training with old Soviet-era weapons, some towed by oxen for lack of working vehicles. It looks almost improvised, but military analysts note that Cuba has a real history of mobilizing its population quickly during crises, and that should not be dismissed as theater. So how did an island already grinding through blackouts and shortages end up rehearsing for an actual attack? The answer starts 3 months earlier, in Caracas, with an operation that lasted barely 2.5 hours. On January 3, 2026, United States forces launched a military operation inside Venezuela, striking infrastructure across the north of the country and sending an apprehension team into Caracas. Their target, President Nicolás Maduro, captured at his compound and flown to New York to face narco-terrorism charges. The entire operation lasted roughly 2 hours and 28 minutes, making it one of the shortest wars in recorded history. Within days, Maduro's former Vice President Delcy Rodriguez was sworn in as acting president, and Washington began negotiating access to Venezuela's oil. For Washington, it was framed as a clean, decisive law enforcement action. For the region, it was something else entirely: proof that the United States was willing to physically remove a head of state it had indicted years earlier. 2 neighboring governments took immediate notice: Nicaragua and Cuba. Almost immediately after the Maduro operation, President Trump halted Venezuelan oil deliveries to Cuba, which had relied on that fuel for years. Mexico, under US pressure, soon stopped its own shipments, too. Cuba lost its 2 largest fuel suppliers within weeks of each other. On January 29th, the White House formalized the pressure with an executive order accusing Cuba of hosting a Russian signals intelligence facility, deepening ties with China, and providing safe harbor to groups Washington designates as terrorist organizations. The order effectively declared Cuba a national security threat, not merely a policy disagreement. The result on the ground was brutal. Blackouts stretched up to 22 hours a day in parts of the island. Hospitals ran short of basic medicine. Food spoiled in refrigerators with no power to keep it cold. This was not collateral damage. It was the pressure working exactly as designed. Then came the move that raised the stakes further. On May 20th, Cuba's Independence Day from Spain, the U.S. Department of Justice unsealed an indictment against Ariel Castro, the 94-year-old former president, and the island's remaining link to the revolutionary generation, over the 1996 shootdown of 2 civilian aircraft flown by a Miami-based exile group. The timing was not accidental. It mirrored exactly the legal pretext Washington had used against Maduro years earlier: an old indictment, dusted off and deployed at the moment of maximum pressure. Cuban officials say a move against Castro himself would end negotiations entirely and make some form of conflict effectively unavoidable. President Miguel Díaz-Canel responded on May Day with a defiant public statement, telling a crowd in Havana that he was prepared to give his life for the revolution if it came to that. It was theater, in part, but also a genuine signal that Cuba's government does not plan to fold quietly. While the political pressure built, the military pressure built alongside it. The USS Nimitz carrier strike group entered the Caribbean in May. Fresh Marine units rotated in to relieve the forces that had been staged there since January. In June, the U.S. Defense Secretary made a visible trip to Guantanamo Bay, a deliberate signal of readiness. Officially, the deployments are framed around Cuban ties to hostile foreign powers and reports of Cuban drone acquisitions, some reportedly supplied by Iran. Cuba rejects these claims as manufactured pretexts. Whatever the underlying motive, the message received in Havana was unambiguous. The option of force is now visibly on the table. In late May, congressional Democrats introduced a war powers resolution intended to prevent unauthorized military action against Cuba without a formal vote. Its fate remains uncertain, but its introduction alone shows how seriously Washington itself is taking the possibility of war. Defense analysts at the Center for Strategic and International Studies have sketched out what a U.S. operation against Cuba might resemble. Unlike the high-risk, high-precision raid in Caracas, a Cuban campaign could look more conventional. Days of punitive airstrikes aimed at drone facilities, intelligence sites, and Cuba's already weakened air defenses. Cuba's military is outdated but not powerless. Analysts note the country has repeatedly shown it can mobilize its population quickly during crises, the same way it responds to hurricanes. A quick collapse of the government is far from guaranteed, even against a badly outmatched conventional force. The deeper worry among analysts is not the operation itself, but what follows. A sudden state collapse in Cuba could trigger internal conflict, a mass exodus across the Florida Straits, and new trafficking routes. Consequences that would land on the United States as directly as on Cuba itself. Not everyone in Washington agrees with the pressure campaign. Mexico's president has publicly rejected U.S. intervention in the region, arguing the Americas do not belong to any single power's doctrine. Regional governments are watching closely, wary of setting a precedent that could someday be turned against them. Inside the U.S., critics have raised a sharper concern. Some lawmakers argue the Maduro operation sets a dangerous precedent, that if extracting a foreign head of state under an American indictment is acceptable, nothing stops other powers from doing the same to leaders they oppose. Human rights and international law experts have gone further, arguing that the fuel blockade amounts to collective punishment of an entire population for the actions of its government. A principle the United States itself is formally committed to avoiding under international treaties it has signed. This standoff has become concrete enough that prediction markets are now pricing it directly. Multiple millions of dollars have traded on whether the United States will strike Cuban soil by a given date, with odds shifting in real time alongside every new naval movement or diplomatic statement. Meanwhile, the State Department has floated a very different path. A possible $100 million aid package in exchange for what it calls meaningful reforms. It is a reminder that even amid carrier deployments and unsealed indictments, a negotiated off-ramp has not been taken off the table. So Washington is running two tracks at once: maximum pressure through blockade and indictment, and a quieter door left open for negotiation. Which track wins out may depend less on strategy documents than on how Havana chooses to respond in the coming weeks. Raul Castro turns 95 this June, and by most accounts his health is failing. Some officials in Havana believe any direct move against him personally would be the point of no return. The moment negotiation ends, and in their words, some are prepared to sacrifice their lives for the revolution, rather than accept it. Whatever happens next, this crisis did not start with Cuba. It started the moment Washington proved, in Venezuela, that removing a hostile government could be done quickly and with limited domestic political cost. Whether that proof becomes a template for the region, or a one-time exception, is the real question hanging over the Caribbean right now. For now, the carrier holds position offshore, the blockade holds the island's lights dim, and 10 million people wait to see which version of this story they are living in. The story doesn't end here. It evolves sometimes overnight. If you want to know the moment it does, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications.